Hey folks, this is John Miller, Executive Editor with WV News. We would like to welcome you to Ask the Experts, featuring John Halderman of Beacon Wealth Management. John is the founder, owner, and certified wealth strategist at Beacon Wealth Management. You can find out more at bwmwv.com. And now live from the studios of the Exponent Telegram in Clarksburg, West Virginia, let's Ask the Expert. Welcome to Ask the Expert with John Halderman of Beacon Wealth Management. John, a lot of attention these days on investment strategies, but what about legacy and estate planning? How important are those?
Oh, absolutely super important, because the one thing we know, none of us are going to escape this life alive. And so what we have to figure is that every single one of my clients, whether they have $2 million or $20 million, everybody in West Virginia feels like they've worked extremely hard for their money. And the one thing I know is that if you don't have appropriate planning in place, it's going to all be a disaster at the end, because you got to deal with big things, simple things such as probate. How do you pass your homes, your farms, and on to your kids? These tax bombs that you're building. When I say tax bomb, I love retirement plans, but if you've done them all pre-tax, well, you're building these up, and somebody has to pay the taxes. And so if you don't do appropriate planning, it could be a lot of taxes at the end. So absolutely, estate and legacy, it's going to dictate basically how your family inherits this money.
How difficult is it? Because, you mentioned, none of us leave here alive, and that can become an emotional thing. In investment-wise, you've got to focus in and help people find those goals and be able to talk about what they want after they're gone.
Yeah, it's a big deal because, like you said, it's death. And, especially, and I hate to say this, especially for men, as men get older, they seem more acceptable to it. Usually a lot of times men in their 70s will come to me and they'll say, hey, John, look, I'm facing my mortality. And I realize if something happens to me, I want someone there that's going to be able to work with my spouse, because I want to make sure that however long my spouse lives after me, that their lifestyle is going to be exactly the same. But leading up to that, it's really a big thing. And the other thing is communication, because rarely do people tell their kids what they have. Because the one thing they don't want is they don't want their kids to come to them as if they're an ATM. And so you got to make sure that, there's this, open lines of communication. And then the third component is being organized. Because I will tell you this, one of the biggest issues we face, and one of the reasons why people come to us so much, is they'll have accounts spread out everywhere. They'll have, an IRA over here. They'll have old 401ks. They have wills in their safety deposit. And they have no idea how all this information comes together in a simple format. And so one of the things we do is we just really put together a digital organizer for people so that when something does happen, their family knows exactly who to call, and that we will help them settle their estate for them. And so that's a big, big deal, because unfortunately, when you deal with people in the retirement red zone, people are going to pass away. They're going to pass away. They're going to end up in a long-term or nursing home, or they're going to end up incapacitated. So absolutely, all those things got to be addressed.
You mentioned the digital portfolio, and I've read some of your stories on that.
Yeah.
Explain that a little bit so that the audience understands. You're talking about helping them organize all aspects.
So let me give you an example between my wife and I. My wife's an accountant by trade. And so we do road trips. And when we do road trips, that's a good chance for us as we're by ourselves to be able to talk about our own financial situation. And so let's say we're driving down the road. And I always say this. Imagine you're driving down the road with your spouse. And your spouse says, hey, honey, now how much do we have in our investments right now? And if you have multiple 401ks, multiple IRAs, well, you're going to go to multiple websites just to try to get that answer. Then you go and you look for your children's investments. Then you go and she goes, now, how are we doing on taxes? And you're like, wait a minute, tax returns in a filing cabinet. Or then we say, well, what's our will? Did we update that? Did we change it after this? We need everything in one spot. This is what I tell people. We need to be able to access everything in one spot. So no matter what the question is from your spouse, if they say, what's going on with our will? Or, hey, did you see our tax return? That you can go in there, Bring up all your accounts, investment accounts. Bring up your credit card debt. Bring up your wills, your properties, whatever it may be, in one safe and secure vault. And so that's what we provide people. We call it a wealth organization portal, to where we put everything you have in one place. This way, when you're traveling or when something happens, you can have an intelligent conversation about that. Because think about this. Let's say your spouse ends up in a nursing home, and you don't know, where's your durable medical powers of attorney? Well, that's a big, big deal, because you can't just go allocating their money if you can't prove that you have that authority. And so if you have that in a vault, you know that no matter what you need, it's easy to get to. Easy to get to.
You talked about the incapacitated and the nursing home situation. That's very important for people to have that, in their plans.
Oh, absolutely. When we think of things, we call it the 5 financial building blocks. And those 5 financial building blocks, investments is just one of 5. And so what I tell people is protecting your family income. Because like right now, I have a 16, a 14-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And so my wife still works also. She worked with us. And so if I am gone for whatever reason, no matter what it is, whether it's incapacitation, death, disability, or I could end up in a nursing home. Let's say I have a heart attack, and the worst thing that happens is I don't die, but I need care. Well, my wife has to be able to continue on with that family income. And so what we have to make sure is that regardless of what happens, number one, we got to make sure that we have adequate protection. Because if you don't have the adequate protection you need, then how are you going to get this income? The second thing is you got to make sure you have the appropriate type, meaning that, not all things are equal. Not all life insurance is equal. Not all long-term care is going to be equal. And then you have to make sure that you have the right documentation and have it organized to get to. I know it sounds harder than what it is. It's not that difficult as long as you organize. But that's what we do. We do those types of things because people say to me all the time, is it just investing? No, investing is just one of multiple components. But that's why we get together with people.
I mean, really, your role, and I think it's important the audience understands this, is that you want people to call you and say, "Hey, I need help. Let's get this organized."
Absolutely.
You'll lead them. You'll walk them through the process.
Absolutely, and that's really the key. It's a process, step for step. We're going to walk you one at a time and help get a good understanding. First, we're going to get this good understanding. We're going to have a legit conversation. I'm going to ask you questions. Such a simple question might be, I'll say, "Hey, John and Lisa. I notice you have 3 kids. You've been working for 30 years. Let's say for some reason, unfortunately, you get killed in a car accident today. What do you want that to look like for your children? What do you want for them?" Okay? And I'm going to let you talk about it because everyone's going to be different. Some people say, "Hey, you know what? No big deal. My kids can take that money direct." Some people want it graduated. What graduated means is I might get it at age 40 or whatever. But what I worry about is this. Let's say your kid's getting ready to inherit this money from a graduated situation, and unfortunately, they're also going through a divorce. Well, what happens is that you've got this lifetime of savings. Now they're going through a divorce, and your ex, whatever it may be, in-law, now may have access to it. And so what I want is I want to take my 40, 50 years of working, and yes, I want my children to benefit from it, but I don't want my former in-laws. So I want to be able to say, and this is what I tell people, it doesn't matter what you want, okay? You can want anything you want. My job is to get a good understanding of that, figure out where you're at today, and identify, are there train wrecks we need to deal with, or are they opportunities that we haven't dealt with, and figure out what is the best strategy to get you what you want. And so, yeah, it's all about you, John.
Well, and I think it's important the audience understands that because there's so many there's those that try to pitch things that are like, well, it's easy, fill this form out and everything's going to be taken care of. It really is about your individual goals and what you want to leave behind as your legacy.
Absolutely. We say it all the time. Everything we do is unique to you. It's uniquely personalized. And so no two people are going to be alike. People are going to have similar concepts, meaning people with children. But we're going to narrow this down, and we're going to have – that's why the conversation is so important, because without the conversation, what we call our discovery conversation, then we don't know any of this stuff. And then after that, then we're going to go through and identify these gaps, potential train wrecks, potential opportunities, and then we're going to come back and make exact recommendations. And again, those recommendations aren't going to just be about investments. It's going to be about legacy. It's going to be about estate. It's going to be about taxation, because for a lot of people, taxes erode so much of what they built.
Well, John, as we like to do on Ask the Expert, a closing thought, closing comment, closing wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's an interesting stat. 66% of people don't have a contingency plan, okay, for incapacitation. 66%. And I tell people that's so crazy because, I went whitewater rafting this weekend with my kids, and the raft guy said, he goes, hey, don't worry. He goes, you have a greater chance of getting hurt driving here than you did on the water. And that made me think about that. People don't realize incapacitation can happen far easier than any of those other things just because we drive. And so what I tell people is you've got to get things like that in order, because if I become incapacitated, it's not automatic that my wife can make decisions for me. And so, it's as simple as a car wreck. Last Monday, I'm cruising down I-79. There's a flood of water. And I get right there at the Meadowbrook exit where the wall is. And wow, I hydroplane and there's a big semi. And all I thought about was, thank God I have my durable medical powers of attorney. Now, granted, I'm a financial person, but that's what I thought about, because if I didn't, and that ended up in that wall or underneath that thing, the worst thing could have happened is I survived but couldn't take care of it. So I tell people, let's take it one step at a time. Don't get yourself overwhelmed. Think about situations like that. Step for step, we will help you get through it together.
Excellent advice once again from John Halderman of Beacon Wealth Management here on Ask the Expert. Join us next time. Ask the Experts, featuring John Halderman of Beacon Wealth Management. John is the founder, owner, and certified wealth strategist at Beacon Wealth Management. You can find out more at bwmwv.com.